same way to those people?
Well, and I think it's an issue of, there's a certain extent we can educate and be proactive into the community with up and coming generations and those who are already set in their ways, although most times I think we can't change those people's minds. But when we look at the federal level and the policy we're facing, and looking to what kind of labeling legislation we're going to have in the ag industry, we need a way to provide understanding to the consumer, and not just through an agriculturalist, but direct understanding through the FDA, through the USDA. And what does that look like? Does that look like a required label on this package that says, this product contains GMOs, but by all accounted research it is completely safe? Or is there a code on that package that the consumer scans, and then it takes them to a website and a link for that product, and it describes, this hormone, this is the background on it. In this milk, it's naturally produced in cows. Same with GMOs. And, we focused a lot on GMOs, but this extends to, the level of, animal welfare certified of certain products, humanely raised, free-cage chickens, free-range chickens, whatever it might be. There's so many different avenues. How do we possibly educate everyone on what they need to know? So I think we need a system that someone can use to look up this information, and the system they're going to trust.
Well, Reece, you bring up a point, and bearing in mind that with the FDA new nutritional facts label, everybody who is a manufacturer has to comply by July 26, 2018. And then in addition to that, those who have 10 million or less sales have an additional year. So the process of using a QR code, that quick reference where you can actually scan it, takes us into the digital media piece and transparency. Okay, we can connect that back to the farm, and that brings in traceability to our products. So there's a lot to that system, and we really have to get on this within our farm bureaus, the local, state, and national level, and say, let's move to this digital means of being able to communicate with our people, and then connecting with our farmers and ranchers, so we can actually see what's going on the farm. If we're going to scan the can of green beans in the store, we should be able to look at the hormones, see which farm it came from, and then that way we're able to connect with our farmers directly, trace our food back to its source, and then be able to communicate the safety and that confidence in the quality of our food. What do you think, Dustin?
Reece and Jessica, I agree with both of your points. And like you said, pushing for a proactive way to inform that consumer the same way that they're being misinformed or their fear is being used against them for profitability on the labels. Like you said, start something, whether it be a QR code, whether it be, on your labeling, by all new research, this has been proved to be safe. I believe that we can work with our Farm Bureau organization, both the American, our local counties, and state level farm bureaus, to push for things such as that, to develop perhaps maybe, even the young farmers and ranchers developing their own committee that works with either legislation, especially, I think one of the things that we haven't talked about yet, we've talked about legislation, we've talked about the consumer, but one of the problems that we really see is connecting with the retail industry that's supplying our food products, the outsourcers of our products, the middleman who's packaging our products. They're the ones putting these labels on. When the food leaves the farm, many of the farmers have no contact with it from the farm to the store. After it leaves after it goes in that truck, after it goes on that, the freezer truck, whatever it may be, and it leaves that farm, they have no more contact. Now, some farmers package their own different areas, but most farmers, for the most case, have no contact with that afterwards. And I think one of the things that we need to focus on is we try to educate the consumer as we push for maybe a committee or as a Farm Bureau organization, a way to push for different labeling that lists the scientific references of why this food is safe on the label, or whether we work with the industry to be able to work with them to provide that kind of literature or some way to provide that on the label as we work with them, because we can focus on the consumer all we want to, but if the industry decides they want to do it anyway, even though we're educating the consumer, the labels are still going to be there. And problems with the industry, as I finish this point, is basically that there's just as many uninformed consumers running these industries, such as Walmart, different retail stores that sell our agricultural products, as there are out there that are purchasing our products.
Well, I think for the goals of the industries and these different packaging companies, and many of them are vertically integrated, like most of the poultry industry, so you have to remember they're on both ends of the spectrum, but we have to target both, avenues, because these companies, they want consistency. Because how is a company with certain rules in Mississippi going to ship food to Virginia who might have completely different labeling rules? That's a corporate nightmare. And the companies don't want that. So without a doubt, I think they'll be on our side, because the fact is we've had to face a compromise. allies with legislators and some of those who we would consider to be activists in the community that push for things like this. And I think the corporations and these businesses will side with us because they know it's kind of the inevitable future, and we need to do it right.
So as a whole, I guess, for some of the strategies we're continuing to build, right? So far, we've decided that we need to educate our consumers, but be more transparent and include the supply market chain. Making sure that they're informed when they are putting the labels on the packets, but as Farm Bureau members, being active in our YF&R committees, having a subcommittee or a different group that's actually communicating directly with the supply chain, communicating with the young farmers and ranchers, and serving as that bridge between the two. And I think that's a fantastic way for us to be able to move forward in labeling and move forward in legislation and being able to have a unified voice of agriculture with all stakeholders involved. So, as we keep going into that conversation, do you think we really reached on the confidence level that our consumers will believe in what we're doing, or, the safety and quality of what we have?
I think from the grassroots level, what we've discussed as far as educating about our products as producers and as it goes through the supply chain, we just have to do a better job, do the job that, the people who are touting the non-GMO and the organic and all those different products, they're doing that job, and we have to do it better. So I think, all the way from the county level up to the state, we need to have some wording. Canada has some of these laws in place right now. The problem is that they're not enforcing them, and there's no teeth to them there in Canada. So we could mirror what they've done with some of our wording, but then it comes to enforcement on some of this false labeling stuff. But moving forward with that, what is the solution, and what part will the Farm Bureau play in it? I think, just like this organization was founded from the grassroots level, we're going to propose things at the county level. They're going to move up to the state. They're going to make it to the national, and we're going to add some new wording into our policy book, and then hopefully things like the National Farmers and Ranchers Alliance, who hold a lot of sway, can talk with the politicians in their state, and we can get some stuff going in Washington to deal with some of these labeling issues.
I completely agree with Strider, and I think that as we move forward, the main thing that we're doing as Farm Bureau members, especially on the grassroots level, is we are farmers and ranchers, we are producers, as we are members of the agricultural industry and future agriculturalists. The best way to combat everything that we talked about here today is simply to tell our story and tell it better than somebody else, because we're the only ones that can tell our story as good as anybody else. We know our story, we know what we do, we know about the consumer, and I think the best thing that we can do is to repair our relationship with the consumers, to continue to tell our story on a more broad spectrum, whether it's working with the industrial companies such, with the food industry, with the retail industry, the agricultural industry, as we push policy for Farm Bureau, working with our legislators, as we work with the AFBF National Convention, as we work with our fellow Farm Bureau members on the county and state level. The greatest way that we can increase consumer education and consumer engagement is simply tell them our story, engage them, and show them that they're the most important thing to us. Not profit, not anything else, but the consumer that we provide for is the most important thing in American agriculture, and is the most important thing to the American farmer on a Farm Bureau.
Well, we can't forget either that some of these people we're facing, for the future to come, they're not going to change. They will always be on the forefront against us. No matter how much we compromise, they're going to want their ultimate goal in the end. So when we continue to educate, one thing we're really good about is preaching to ourselves, because we all know the truth. But, we have RFD TV, rural radio, preaching the truth. To those who listen, they're agriculturalists. How often do you see agriculturalists on the local news channel, on national news? I think those are some of the things we need to continue for upcoming years in order to educate the public, create more transparency, and be certain that there's no discrepancies between us and the consumer. Because those who we fight against, that are really, really on the other end of the spectrum, will never change, and we have to face that truth.
I think that's an interesting point you make, Reece, and that gets into a whole nother issue of social things going on in the U.S., and you're talking about television and advertisement and the way things are being skewed, and so that's a whole separate social issue, but it plays a part in this, and that's just an interesting take that I'm taking from what you said there.
I go along with Reece, and I believe that as you're talking about the mainstream media, the most important thing we can do as a Farm Bureau organization and in telling our story is to work with areas that may not necessarily be familiar with agriculture at all. We use the sources that speak to agriculturalists and speak to farmers, and we educate our fellow agriculturalists. But we need to use the outlets made available to us, not just social media, not just YouTube, but the mainstream media outlets and different outlets and addressing environmentalist concerns, different organizations' concerns, and consumers that are maybe completely against conventional agricultural practices. Address those concerns, work with different organizations, news outlets, and different outlets that give information to these people that we may not usually think to talk to because we usually take a defensive stance, but take a positive change stance with them.
And Justin, do you think that possibly some sort of nonprofit being funded where we could generate money to do this with? Because when you're talking about network television and doing something of that scope, and we all know that the Humane Society of the U.S. and ASPCA and all these people, they have just tons and tons and tons of money, and we're just kind of a grassroots organization. So could that be something to get into those outlets where we can further educate these people that are urban and removed from the farm?
Time has been called.